You have been the same weight your entire adult life. You eat the exact same foods, you do the exact same workouts, but suddenly, in your 40s or 50s, a stubborn layer of fat appears around your belly. You try eating less. You try running more, but it only gets worse. What if your body isn't broken, but your hormones have simply changed the rules of your metabolism? Today, we expose the menopause belly secret. This video is for educational purposes only. Hormone replacement therapy, HRT, requires thorough evaluation. Always consult with a board-certified endocrinologist, OBGYN, or functional medicine practitioner before starting or stopping any hormone treatments, especially if you have a history of hormone receptor-positive cancers. And first, I want to say this clearly. If this is happening to you, it is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not a failure of discipline. What many women experience in perimenopause and menopause is a real biological shift in how the body handles energy, fat storage, and blood sugar. Menopause is associated with reduced energy expenditure, accelerated loss of fat-free mass, and increased central adiposity and fasting insulin levels. In other words, the body's rules change. Now let's talk about the trap that so many women are handed. Eat less, move more. On paper, that sounds logical. Calories matter. Energy balance matters. But in midlife, that slogan is incomplete because it ignores what is happening to your hormones, your lean mass, your insulin response, and your resting metabolism. A woman in her 30s and a woman in her 50s may not be operating with the same metabolic machinery anymore. During the menopause transition, declining estrogen is linked to adverse metabolic changes, including increased risk of obesity, insulin resistance, and central fat accumulation. That means the same exact diet can produce a very different result at a very different hormonal state. So when a woman sees the scale creeping up, she often does what she was taught to do. She slashes calories harder, she skips meals. She adds more cardio. She becomes more disciplined. But for a menopausal body, that can backfire. It can push the body to conserve energy, amplify hunger, and strip away the very tissue that keeps metabolism strong, muscle. The deeper issue is that menopause is not just about reproduction. Estrogen has metabolic jobs. It helps support healthy fat distribution, energy regulation, and insulin sensitivity. When estrogen falls, the metabolic environment changes, and the body becomes more prone to storing fat centrally rather than peripherally. Research has long shown that the menopause transition is associated with increased abdominal and visceral adipose tissue accumulation, and that central body fatness and insulin resistance are tightly connected in this life stage. That is why the menopause belly can feel so unfair. It is not just about eating too much. It is about how the body now partitions fuel. When insulin signaling is less efficient, glucose is more likely to be stored rather than smoothly used, and the abdomen often becomes the default storage site. That is a physiological pattern, not a moral failure. So if you have been blaming yourself, I want you to hear this. Your body may be asking for a different metabolic strategy, not more punishment. And this is where the old approach becomes dangerous. When women are already in a lower estrogen, less forgiving metabolic state, drastic calorie restriction can chip away at lean mass. That matters because fat-free mass is a major driver of metabolic rate, and menopause is associated with accelerated loss of that tissue. Over time, less muscle can mean a lower daily energy burn, weaker glucose disposal, and a body that becomes even easier to push toward fat gain later. So in the next chapter, we are going to shift the conversation from punishment to physiology. We are going to talk about why a macronutrient shift, less refined carbohydrate, more protein, and better blood sugar stability, can be far more effective than simply eating less. And as always, any hormone conversation, including HRT, belongs in a personalized medical evaluation with your OBGYN or endocrinologist. especially if you have a history of estrogen-dependent or hormone-sensitive cancer. Now let's get specific about what is actually happening in the body. Menopause is not just a reproductive transition. It is a metabolic transition. Estrogen has roles far beyond the ovaries. It helps regulate glucose handling, insulin sensitivity, and how the body distributes fat. When estrogen declines during the menopause transition, multiple studies show that the body becomes more prone to central fat gain, especially around the abdomen, and more vulnerable to worsening insulin sensitivity. This is why so many women feel like their metabolism suddenly changed its mind. It did. The hormonal environment changed, and the cells are now responding differently to the same inputs. What used to be a predictable pattern of eating and exercising can become a frustrating cycle of fat gain, fatigue, and blood sugar instability. That is not imagination. That is physiology. Here is the key connection. Lower estrogen often means lower insulin sensitivity. In practical terms, that means your cells do not respond to insulin as efficiently as they once did. Glucose does not get handled as smoothly, and the body is more likely to route that excess energy into storage. Over time, that storage pattern tends to shift toward the abdomen and the organs, creating what people call the menopause belly. This is one reason belly fat in midlife can feel so stubborn. It is not simply a question of willpower or exercise volume. It is a question of where the body prefers to store fuel under a changed hormonal signal. Research consistently links the menopause transition with greater central adiposity and increased visceral fat accumulation. Visceral fat is the kind of fat that matters metabolically. It is not just a cosmetic issue. It is associated with a more inflammatory, more insulin-resistant state. And during the menopause transition, the evidence shows a clear trend toward increasing abdominal fatness and worsening metabolic risk markers. That is why two women can eat similarly and move similarly, yet have completely different outcomes depending on their hormone status, muscle mass, sleep, stress load, and insulin response. So when a woman says, "I'm doing everything right, but my waist keeps expanding," I believe her. The problem is often not effort. The problem is that the metabolic terrain has shifted. And when the terrain shifts, the strategy has to shift with it. This is the part most women never get told. Once insulin sensitivity starts to slip, the body becomes less forgiving of high-refined carbohydrate patterns, especially if muscle mass is also declining. That does not mean carbohydrates are bad. It means the midlife body often needs a different balance of protein, fiber, fats, and total glucose load than it did in the past. The goal is not starvation. The goal is metabolic alignment. In the next chapter, I'll show you why drastic calorie cutting can backfire by accelerating muscle loss, which makes the whole problem worse. Now we have to talk about the part that gets missed in almost every diet conversation: muscle. In medicine, sarcopenia is the progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength, and it is one of the major concerns of aging, especially in women going through menopause. During the menopausal transition, studies show lean body mass can decline while fat mass increases, which means the body composition shift is not just weight gain. It is a loss of metabolically active tissue. So when a woman sees the belly fat and responds by cutting calories hard, the body often does not interpret that as, "Great, let's burn only fat." Instead, it interprets it as energy scarcity. Human studies show calorie restriction reduces energy expenditure, and dietary restriction during weight loss decreases skeletal muscle mass, which in turn reduces strength and resting metabolic rate. This is why starving yourself can be so counterproductive in midlife. If you lose muscle, you lose one of the most important tissues for glucose disposal and daily energy use. Menopause already shifts the body towards central fat gain and lower lean mass. Aggressive undereating can make that trend worse, not better. That is the vicious cycle. Less food, less muscle, lower resting burn. and then a higher likelihood of rebound fat gain when normal eating resumes. And I want to say this carefully and clinically. This is not a failure of willpower. It is a mismatch between the strategy and the biology. You cannot keep using a famine strategy on a body that is already losing protective lean tissue. This is where many women get trapped by fear. They think, if I eat more, I'll gain weight. But when protein is too low and calories are too aggressive, the real cost is often muscle loss. Observational data in postmenopausal women show that higher protein intake is associated with greater lean mass, and adequate protein supports the tissue you need to preserve metabolism and function. That is why I am not asking you to starve. I am asking you to protect muscle. The takeaway is simple. In menopause, the goal is not smaller and weaker. The goal is leaner, stronger, and metabolically more resilient. That means preserving muscle while reducing the glucose burden on the body. In the next chapter, I'll show you the biological fix, the macronutrient shift that matches your new hormonal reality. Now we get to the part that changes everything. You do not need to starve your body. You need to feed it differently. That is the biological fix. In perimenopause and menopause, the most effective shift is usually not less food across the board. It is a macronutrient shift. Less refined carbohydrate, more high-quality protein, and enough healthy fats to support satiety, blood sugar stability, and lean tissue preservation. Why? Because if estrogen has changed the body's insulin response, then a high-carb, low-protein pattern can keep pushing glucose and insulin in the wrong direction. The goal is to lower the demand on insulin, not to create a constant state of deprivation. Protein becomes especially important here because it helps protect muscle mass, and muscle is one of your most powerful metabolic assets. When you preserve lean mass, you support a healthier resting metabolic rate and better glucose disposal. That means your body becomes more efficient at using fuel instead of storing it. At the same time, reducing refined carbs can help reduce the glucose spikes that drive insulin demand. This is not about demonizing carbohydrates. It is about choosing carbohydrates more strategically. Fewer ultra-processed sugars and starches, more fiber-rich, nutrient-dense foods that do not hammer the system. Healthy fats also matter because they help with satiety and make it easier to stay out of the blood sugar roller coaster. So the message is not, eat as little as possible. The message is, stabilize insulin, protect muscle, and give your hormones a better environment to work in. That is how you stop fighting your body and start working with it. In the final chapter, I'll show you the metabolic support strategy, including the kind of premium botanical support some women use as part of a broader glucose balancing routine. So here is the strategy in one sentence. Support insulin sensitivity, protect muscle, and reduce the glucose burden on the body. That is the metabolic protocol. In menopause, the body is often dealing with lower estrogen, more central fat storage, and a higher tendency toward insulin resistance, so the solution is not punishment. It is support. Menopause is consistently associated with increased visceral fat accumulation and worsening cardiometabolic risk markers, which is why the same old approach stops working. And yes, this is exactly the point where you need a personalized conversation with your clinician. Always consult your OBGYN regarding hormonal balance, and do not start, stop, or change HRT without medical supervision. ACOG notes that hormone therapy is individualized treatment and should be discussed with a qualified clinician. That is why some women benefit from a premium metabolic support protocol built around healthy blood sugar habits, high-protein nutrition, and targeted botanical support. A formula like Sugar Defender can be positioned as part of that broader routine for women who want extra support for healthy glucose metabolism and a steadier metabolic rhythm. The point is not magic. The point is consistency, physiology, and better inputs for a hormone-shifted body. Because when your cells are less insulin sensitive, Every meal matters a little more. When you lower refined carbs, increase protein, and support the system instead of stressing it, you make it easier for the body to stop storing, start stabilizing, and finally feel predictable again. Menopause-associated lean mass loss and sarcopenia risk are real concerns, which is another reason protein and muscle protection matters so much here. So if you have been fighting your body, I want you to hear this one last time. You are not failing. Your biology has changed, and your strategy has to change with it. The answer is not more shame, more cardio, or less and less food. The answer is a smarter macro shift, better insulin support, and a plan that protects your muscle while respecting your hormones. Check the link in the description for the Menopause Metabolic Blueprint. And again, always consult with your board-certified OBGYN, endocrinologist, or functional medicine practitioner regarding hormonal balance, and especially before starting or stopping any HRT if you have a history of hormone receptor-positive cancers.